You're listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. Did you know that it is estimated that by 2050, there will be more plastic by weight than fish in the ocean? That's mind-blowing to me. And so I wanted to learn a little bit more about this because, who's responsible? Is it us as consumers? Is it the companies that are supplying this packaging? Is it further up the supply chain? So I had a great time inviting and interviewing Atlantic Packaging President Wes Carter on the show, and we take a deep dive into plastic pollution. Everything from zero waste to designing for circularity to even the carbon footprint of plastic packaging. So I'm excited about this one. I hope you enjoy. Thanks. The Sustainable Angler Podcast is brought to you by Emerger Strategies, a sustainable business consultancy whose mission is to solve the climate crisis by helping your business go carbon neutral and zero waste. To learn more, visit emergerstrategies.com. So Wes, we met, it was a couple of years ago, so this was pre-COVID at a Low Country Land Trust event. I think the event's called Flourish, and so that's where we kind of initially met. And when I first learned about Atlantic Packaging, and y'all have got a really fascinating history and story, and wanted to kind of just get things kicked off. If you wouldn't mind just providing a little bit of background on your company and yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Atlantic Packaging, we actually turned 75 years old this month.
It's awesome. Congrats.
Exciting. We're a third generation packaging company. My grandfather, Horace Carter, started Atlantic in 1946. And we actually started as a weekly newspaper of all things. My grandfather graduated from the University of North Carolina as the editor of the Daily Tar Heel. And then he moved to a small town in North Carolina called Tabor City and started a weekly newspaper. Really the interesting part about the inception of Atlantic, my grandfather, within about the first year of him publishing that newspaper, became aware that the Ku Klux Klan was really active in that community and the surrounding communities, and doing motorcades and dragging people out of their homes and cross burnings and really all the things you read about in the history books. And my grandfather had this liberal arts, education, and he was a God and country, power of the pen kind of guy. And he took it upon himself to use his newspaper to fight the Klan. Long story short, because of his writing and the work that he did, the FBI, with his help, infiltrated the Klan and arrested over 300 Klansmen, including the Grand Dragon, the Carolina Ku Klux Klan. And that broke their back. They were never the same organization in the Southeast. And my grandfather won the Pulitzer Prize for meritorious public service in 1951. And he was the first weekly newspaper to ever win a Pulitzer. So that's how Atlantic started.
That's unreal.
And, we, in those days, if you were in the newspaper business, you were also in the paper supply business. So our packaging business actually grew out of that paper supply business, specifically with textile companies. As the textile industry moved from the Northeast, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, down to the Southeast to set up factories, we began selling them converted paperboard for, men's shirts, collar strips, and, shirt inserts, underwear and sock inserts, those kind of things. And that just evolved into tape and bags and all the different type of packaging items kind of grew up around that textile industry. So that's really how we started. Fast forward to today, we are the largest privately held packaging company in North America now. We have locations, all over the country. We're certainly saturated in the Southeast because we're based in Wilmington, North Carolina, where I grew up. But and today we service primarily large consumer products companies across a lot of different verticals, food, beverage, automotive, medical device, building products. We do a lot in the e-commerce space these days. We also still have a pretty big textile business down south. But really, anybody manufacturing anything is a target customer for us. And And like I said, most of our customers are large, Fortune, 200, 300 type organizations. So we're really diversified. We sell packaging equipment, we sell materials, we do technical service. We also manufacture a lot of things. We're a large paperboard converter. We have a printing and graphics division. So we do labels and folded cartons, and, super diversified, and, roughly 1,500 employees. And, and I've been with Atlantic full time for about 20 years, and I've been the president for the last 7. My father, Rusty, is still our CEO, and he works out of our Wilmington office, and I'm right here in Charleston.
Okay, cool. Well, that is an incredible story, and cool to hear the history, just kind of sort of as textiles move south, and sort of the evolution of the business. And what's interesting to me when hearing you tell that story is, what I hear is, kind of and sort of an innovative company that is, changing with the signs of the times. And one of those things that I know in terms of, that's obviously a topic of this podcast, and is, packaging, right? I mean, you're in the packaging business, and, as an angler, and I know we've talked before, as an angler and a surfer, we see it out there in the ocean all the time, right? I mean, whether you're fishing or surfing, and I kind of wanted to just get a conversation started a little bit about, what is it like? Are people just not recycling, or is there recycling infrastructure? Are there, what is let's dive into this topic a little bit on sustainable packaging.
Sure. And it is a radically complex issue. And that's why a lot of the solutions do take a lot of deep thinking and sense making. And that's one of the things I've really been focused on over the last several years, is really trying to map this whole supply chain, really from cradle to grave, and what they call now cradle to cradle. We really don't want products to end up in a grave anymore. Yeah. And really, trying to understand that whole supply chain, from how the products are manufactured, the packaging options, the recycling infrastructure, which is super complex and evolving all the time. And so, really, the future for packaging, in my opinion, is we have to design packaging for circularity. And that has traditionally not been a priority. We design packaging for function and form. We design packaging for marketing reasons, but again, primarily to protect products. But designing for circularity, it's really been more convenience and cost. I mean, that is the world we have lived in. Everything is about convenience and cost. And if those are your only motivating forces for designing, it can be very problematic, long term, especially when we start to look at the waste issue we have today. The outdoors has been really important to me my whole life. I mentioned my grandfather earlier. The second part of his career, my grandfather was a lifelong freshwater fisherman. And so when he retired from Atlantic and my father took over in the 70s, my grandfather actually moved to Central Florida, and he wrote, close to 25 books all about freshwater fishing. He was considered one of the foremost freshwater fishing writers in Central Florida back in the 80s and early 90s. And so it's been a part of the blood of my family and our organization. My father has been a lifelong outdoorsman and hunter and fisherman. And, we grew up doing a lot of offshore fishing. And then, today I'm a passionate angler, but also a lifelong surfer. And to your point, I've traveled around the world and been fortunate enough to be able to do that, whether it be, overseas or Central America or the Caribbean. Even throughout this country, fishing, hunting, and surfing. And in my lifetime, just alone, even over the last 6 or 8 years, the level of plastic pollution specifically that I see in our waterways is just undeniable. And the thing that concerns me is, as someone in this packaging supply chain, the thing that I don't think most people recognize is this problem is getting worse, and it's getting exponentially worse. The best figures we have today from the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which we're members of, is currently globally, we're putting about 11 million tons of plastics in the oceans every single year, 11 million tons a year. And at the rate we're going, by the year 2040, that number will be 29 million tons. So you think about that, we're going to triple the rate over the next 20 years. And, this problem, if you go over to Indonesia or Malaysia or India, it's pervasive. I mean, I was in the Mentawai Island surfing several years ago, and there are plastics everywhere. Talked to a friend of mine who was fishing in the Dominican Republic, and he's like, Wes, literally, we were shagging plastic bags off our hooks. He's like, you could hardly fish down there because there's so much plastic in the ocean. And if it's that bad now, triple that number and see what it looks like. And, I talked to the guys in the Charleston Waterkeeper, and they're like, one of the issues we've got on the, here on the East Coast is so much of the plastic ends up in the estuaries and in the marshes. We don't see it on the beaches, so people don't realize what a problem it is. All you got to do is walk into the filter system of the marsh to see it sitting there. Yeah. And so I think for general consumers and the general population, trust some of us that are in the supply chain. This problem is significant and growing. And, we need cleanup efforts, but we also have to shift the way we purchase products, the way we design products, the way we design packaging.
Yeah. And just for the listeners out there, just as a point of clarification, for if you're not familiar with circularity, where traditional models were linear, right? So it was take, make, waste is the easiest way to describe it, right? You take a resource, you make something out of it, you throw it away. Whereas circularity is about making decisions in the design phase that will be able to keep a product in a usable form indefinitely in some cases. But for example, plastic packaging. So if there's reusable plastic packaging and it's designed in a way that can ship products and materials and be reused over and over again, well, what does that do? That keeps plastic out of the ocean. That keeps plastic out of our waterways because it has value in being reused instead of just, all right, well, I'm done with it, I'm going to toss it. So I think I got that as a somewhat of a good way to describe it, Wes. I'm not sure, but
you're all over.
Yeah, but that's more or less what that means, and so that's. And another key thing, part of that is the design phase, right? That's where you can make, and that's true with anything related to sustainability, whether it's a green building, you always want to have a design charrette first. If it's a product that you're looking at, anything that you can do in the design phase is going to make it easier to make better decisions for the environment throughout the life cycle of the product, if that makes sense. So anyway, that's my tidbit, But so we're talking about, this is pervasive and we're seeing it everywhere. And I know that because we're connected, and I've seen some really interesting things that y'all are doing to affect positive change as a business in terms of sustainable packaging. And I was wondering if you would be willing to highlight a couple of those products or materials that y'all are using to help affect some of this change.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first thing that I think it's important to recognize is you've got multiple areas of the supply chain. And so when you're looking at, and I do believe that black and white thinking as it relates to plastic packaging is a real error in direction. So anytime I hear anyone say, oh, we need to get rid of all plastics, I'm like, well, you just haven't done any investigation. That is a sentiment that is based on not being educated, because there are areas of the supply chain where plastic packaging is radically efficient. And if you eliminated it, it would cause a trickle down effect that would be far worse. You've got areas with food, for instance. Plastic packaging is critical in keeping food safe for longer periods of time. And so the idea that we would get rid of plastic packaging for food, well, we're going to throw away a lot more food, which nobody wants to do. So again, I look at the different areas of supply chain, which I break basically into two categories. You've got business to business packaging or logistical packaging, where you're shipping primarily large pallets of goods, which is an area of the supply chain that we're deeply engaged in and have been for decades. And then the other area of the supply chain, which most people are much more familiar with, is the business to consumer, especially with the advent and the growth of e-commerce. Business to consumer packaging has become a huge part of our world. And one of the really silver linings, I believe, of COVID is because everyone was stuck at home and e-commerce makes it so easy to get products to your house. All of a sudden, one of the offsets from that was everyone was getting so much packaging to their house over the last year. It was funny because my friends would text me pictures of boxes that would show up with all this packaging and say, "Can't you do something about this? Aren't you in this business? I don't know what to do with all this packaging." So I actually think that COVID raised awareness at the consumer level, for the need for some reform related to packaging. I think that's been a real positive. But so when we look at sustainable packaging, when it's business to business packaging, one of the primary products in that supply chain is stretch film. So most people are familiar with clear film. It wraps around pallets of boxes or bottles or whatever else it may be to get those products from point A to point B. That's a big product for us. Okay, so stretch film is radically efficient. You can wrap, a 3,000 to 5,000 pound pallet of goods for as little as 6 or 8 ounces of film. It don't get any better than that. And so that is an area where plastic packaging makes a lot of sense. However, there's probably, if I had to estimate, 2 billion pounds of stretch film used in the United States annually. So it's a big number. Very little of it is recycled. If I had to guess, less than 1% is recycled.
Wow.
But that product is highly recyclable. It has no ink on it. It has no adhesive on it. So one of the things that we're trying to work on with some really large companies, really in the beverage industry initially, is creating what they call a closed loop system. So it's much easier to collect products between businesses than from businesses to consumers because there's just so fewer destinations. So if you can imagine a big beer company that has a brewery and then they're shipping to their wholesalers. Well, one brewery may have several dozen wholesaler locations they're shipping to. So collecting something like stretch film at the wholesaler level and bringing it back, baling it, and having it recycled is something that should be very doable. So we're in the middle of trials and pilots to create closed loop systems to keep that product out of landfills and recycled into other products. So closed loop systems you hear a lot about in our industry. When it relates to business to consumer packaging, which is the area that we have so much leakage, the problem of plastic pollution in our environment really isn't business to business packaging. It's business to consumer packaging. When it gets in the hands of the consumer, we just have a lot less control of it. My perspective is because of that, because we just cannot guarantee that if it ends up in the hands of the consumer, it won't end up in a river, a lake, or the ocean. Packaging flies out of trash cans, it flies out of cars, boats, it just happens. So we have really been promoting more paper-based packaging if it's going to be shipped to your house. So that can be craft paper void fill instead of plastic air pillows. We introduced last year a padded mailer that's made from 100% paper as opposed to the traditional bubble mailers you might see. Yeah. What a lot of people don't realize is a lot of that flexible packaging that ends up at your house it may be, quote, recyclable, but it doesn't get recycled because there's very little value to it. So you put it in your blue bin, it goes to the municipal recycling facility, they send it to the landfill. So that's one of the other things too, is we need a lot more education around recycling. But if it's in this country, we recycle paper really well. I mean, somewhere north of 80% of all the corrugated boxes that go to your house are recycled. So that infrastructure exists. And a thing like a paper mailer or paper packaging, void fill packaging, that gets recycled just with the corrugated boxes. The system is there. And on the off chance that paper packaging ends up in the environment, in about 12 to 14 weeks, it's going to be gone. Right. So to me, that's the solution that we should be focused on in that space. Paper packaging, that's quickly biodegradable. That's a key word there. You hear a lot of people. I mean, my car is biodegradable. It just takes a long time.
Right.
So that word gets thrown around a lot. So again, those are the kind of things that we're focused on. Again, we always want to look at efficiency first. How can we use the least amount of packaging possible to get products from point A to point B? And then how do we create circularity and closed loop systems in certain areas? And then in other areas, let's identify what we recycle really, really well, and where we can pivot to those products. And that's also where a lot of the innovation needs to be as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's a couple things that you mentioned too, that I think is interesting is, talking about recycling education and so for one thing, it's like, all right, well, I'll just throw everything in my blue bin. Well, someone's got to sort all that. And most of the times, most people don't know what their local municipality will even recycle if they have that. And that's just in the United States. Furthermore, if you look at, I was working with a lodge in the Bahamas, and the island Abaco. I mean, they just don't have any infrastructure, any waste infrastructure, period. So it's like they'll get shipped, everything from beer bottles to sodas, whatever, and it comes in packaging. Well, it's got nowhere to go. And so they may all take that to a landfill, but then a hurricane comes and blows it in the ocean. And that, there's this long line of, I think, okay, well, I'll just recycle it. Well, then you also, that opened my eyes traveling to another country and seeing like, wow, okay, well, they literally, they just don't even have a way to deal with it. And so it's an interesting problem that I think, to your point, and are 100% correct about, that can be addressed further up the supply chain, not further down, because you can't rely on every person to either, one, have the infrastructure, to understand what, we've proven we can't rely on consumers to always do the right thing. So I think addressing it further up the supply chain and using it, like, as you said, as a tool to sustainability, as a tool to drive innovation, is kind of a win-win scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that is the key. The big advances that I've seen in sustainability are from companies that are deciding to innovate. The innovation in technology and packaging is really no different than technology in cell phones or computers or anything else. There's tremendous energy, very smart people, working all the time to create packaging that is more functional, that is more efficient. And that needs to be something that's encouraged and rewarded. And that is who we are as an organization. I mean, we have really built a reputation on being the most technical packaging company in the sustainable space. And again, when we're looking to create packaging efficiency, which, like I mentioned earlier, is, in my opinion, the first rule of sustainability. If we can use less, that's always, now we have to use less and still get the products where they need to be safely. The one thing we don't want to do is use less packaging and then have tons of damage, because then we're throwing away products, and that's the worst. So, packaging is critically important to protecting us from throwing away products. But then from there, it's about, and typically when we're talking about radically efficient packaging, it's always highly technical. When you're going thinner, faster, stronger, that takes technology. And it also takes not only technology with the products, but many times in industrial applications with the equipment that is applying those products as well. So marrying equipment, materials, a high level of technical service is really the key to packaging efficiency, and something our industry is very focused on. And the large consumer products companies are demanding, because the nice thing, when you can also pair sustainability with using less, there's almost always a cost savings too. So when I'm looking at for sustainability gains, if I can find areas where we can pair sustainability and cost savings, we run to those because they get adopted so quickly, But the reality is there are certain parts of the supply chain, paper packaging is one of them. In many applications, if you're shipping from a single-use plastic to a paper-based product and it's more sustainable, it's just going to cost more. Not always, but in many cases it is. But I do believe that the brands, and this is starting to shift, are beginning to value sustainability beyond cost savings. And historically, that's all that sustainability meant, was cost savings. But the brands are really waking up. And I think a lot of that's about the consumers. I read something, a few weeks ago that that the 18 to 34-year-olds in this country, 75% of that group, which actually has more buying power than the baby boomers today, value sustainability as core to the products and packaging that they purchase. 75%. I mean, the brands listen to numbers like that.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I will, because I've worked with some, like everybody, if you're in the apparel business, for example, everybody is like, how do we get rid of these, like all these individual single plastic bags that go on our products? And what I've had, part of that process is going, well, and what a lot of consumers don't understand is that the environmental impact of damaging that product is far greater than the environmental impact of ensuring that that product is not damaged and is able to be delivered to the consumer and live out a usable life as a product versus everything, all of the embodied carbon and water and everything else in apparel. If it's, let's just hypothetically say you just put it in a cardboard box and you were shipping that from China or wherever, and hurricane, whatever, the box gets wet, all the product's ruined. Well, all of the embodied energy, carbon, water that went into making that product is now totally gone to waste. So that's why these apparel companies have to wrap their products in plastic packaging, right? But then you look for other options, like, okay, well, are there ones that are 100% made from recycled materials or are recycled and all these other things? But I think that's just a really important point that you made in terms of understanding the value of packaging in using it as a way to protect products, because to ruin it from the outset would have a far greater environmental impact than it would to wrap them and ensure that they're delivered safely to the end user. Yeah.
And, at the same time, I think that it's important to understand that that is absolutely true, but it's not an excuse not to innovate. I do hear a lot of people in the apparel industry that say, well, we just have no choice but to use plastic bags. Well, the reality is there are some great high performance paper solutions for covering apparel now that look great. I mean, we sell some of these products. I mean, they are very good looking. They are more expensive. I mean, there's nothing cheaper than a super thin gauge garment bag. It's as cheap as it gets. But, an apparel company has to make a decision that we're literally going to pay as much as 50 or 60 or maybe even 100% more for this bag to protect our product because we value sustainability and we know our customers do too. Mm. And one of the things I've seen recently, we do a lot of business with certain companies that are in the outdoor industry. I won't name any names, but companies you guys would know well. Mm. And I've been really impressed. They are listening to their consumers and they're wanting to make big shifts and they're willing to pay more if that's what it takes in order to be more sustainable. And we have to have that kind of leadership. Like I said earlier, we have to get away from an economy where everyone in this industry only looks at cost as the primary driver. There is a significant cost to polluting our oceans for future generations. It may be a little bit harder to quantify in the products that we buy, but we have got to begin to look at what is the cost of doing nothing? What is the cost to our children, our children's children? What kind of legacy are we leaving? For me, that has become a real personal passion and mission to get that word out there. I don't, and again, it's starting to shift. More and more people are rallying around it. I give a lot of credit to people, like the folks at Patagonia. They were a big inspiration for me. Yvonne's book, Let My People Go Surfing, I think should be a must read for anybody in industry.
100% agree.
But again,
yeah. So we talked a little bit about that too, and I'll just mention second that if you have not read, if you're in business and you're looking to really get inspired, Let My People Go Surfing is a fantastic read. But we're going to come back to that because at the end of this, I want to talk about some fishing and surfing. But what I want to kind of also talk about that you mentioned is, and I guess you answered it, but is it cost that's keeping companies from moving away from plastic packaging? Is that that's the primary driver, right? I mean, it's just like, hey, look, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, cost or function, and again, like I mentioned earlier, we don't have a lot of great options for wrapping raw chicken, outside of plastic. I don't think anybody wants to buy raw chicken wrapped in paper,
right?
And so, but again, it's not an excuse to not innovate. That is one area of the supply chain where I actually think biofilms, compostable films, I don't think that's a panacea. You hear a lot about it, films made from sugar cane or corn, even algae. I think there is absolutely a place for those products, but I do not believe they will be ubiquitous, mainly because I don't think we want to transition all the plastic that we buy to feedstocks from industrial farming products. I don't think we want to, rely on industrial farmed corn for all of our packaging needs. I think that has reverberations that could be catastrophic. However, in food packaging, in products that we know need to be in some sort of polymer-based packaging for food safety, that is an area that I think we should spend a lot of time looking at biofilms. And there's some other areas too, but that one specifically. But when it comes to a lot of different types of packaging that don't have a quote freshness component, cost is the biggest driver. So, and again, you do have to look at certain areas of the supply chain. As I mentioned earlier, stretch film, for instance, in business to business packaging is really, really efficient. And so if you've got a plastic product that's really efficient, and there's other options, other examples besides stretch film, but if I were to replace this plastic with something else, I'd have to use 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times as much packaging, even if it is sustainable. Probably not the right direction to go. Let's figure out a way to make this plastic product more circular. And again, I do think where we need a lot of leadership at the federal government level, you mentioned it earlier, the municipal recycling infrastructure in the United States is so convoluted and it's different from municipality to municipality. I recently traveled to Austin, Texas, to meet with Richie Getter, who is one of the owners of Balcones Resources. They're the privately held municipal recycling facility in Austin, and they're also one of the most advanced recycling facilities in the country. They use optical sorters, and it's basically robotics to identify products, take pictures of products, and then automatically sort them. When you can do that really, really efficiently, all these things that we traditionally call waste, we got to remember they have value. An aluminum can sell for as much as 75 cents a pound, So that is the other paradigm shift I think we really have to have in industry as well as at the consumer level. Like the things we traditionally look at as trash have real value in the new earth where we are looking for circularity and a higher level of recycling. And so we got to have damn sophisticated recycling infrastructure in this country to sort things efficiently, because if you don't have those, it's real inefficient to sort it, and then it becomes too expensive to recycle it. But if we can sort it automatically with optical sorters and then bale the stuff efficiently, all of a sudden creating circularity and creating value around all these products becomes achievable. And all of a sudden a lot less of it ends up in landfills, because you're not going to throw $100 bills in landfills very often.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point to make. And that's what in the, the little sustainability speak would call as a business, your waste, right? If you paid for it and you're throwing it away, that's a squandered corporate asset, so let's find ways to potentially create new revenue streams and drive innovation with products that are traditionally being thrown away. And to your point, it sounds like technology, being able to make that valuable through efficiency, as you said, throughout this, and technology, like this guy in Austin, is a solution, which is, that's kind of part of the focus of this is, and having these conversations, is to inspire. And so for me to hear that these things are happening now, because I don't know a ton about packaging. I know a little bit, but this is enlightening and hopeful for me anyway, to hear that, hey, look, these things are being worked on today, because all it takes is for people to know that it's achievable, right? Once they realize that, hey, well, hang on, this can be done, then okay, well, what do we got to do? Let's start hauling ass with this.
I mean, in my opinion, we could really use some leadership at government levels to say, we want every single municipal recycling facility to look like the one in Austin, Texas. That seems like a really reasonable use of taxpayer dollars. Why in Charleston are there certain things that we can't recycle, but in Austin you can? Why in rural parts of the country do you virtually have no recycling? Why in the inner cities of places like Chicago you have no recycling? I mean, recycling should be ubiquitous across the entire country. It should be uniform, and it should be highly automated. To me, that's the biggest no-brainer. That and curbside composting. Those are my two big ones. Those two things work so well. And, but we have to have leadership at the government level that says, we are going to do this. Because until we get the sortation piece done efficiently and correctly, everything else downstream of that doesn't work very well. So to me, collection, sorting has to come first.
Interesting. All right. And so we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious, because I know I've certainly thought about it. And in fact, the other day, I bought some eggs from the grocery store that were like organic, cage-free eggs and all that good stuff. But they were in a plastic packaging, and I opened it up, and it said, these eggs are basically wrapped in plastic because it has a smaller carbon footprint than an alternative for paper. And I was like, that's interesting. And so I've known that obviously there's a connection between climate and plastic packaging, right? Because it's derived from oil or fossil fuels for the most part. And I want to get your take on this, because I think that it's interesting. That kind of shocked me a little bit when I looked in the egg carton and was like, huh. It's like, is that right? So what is your take on this? How are they connected? What's the deal?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I take great issue with. I'm glad you didn't tell me who it was. I don't want to point fingers and call people out, but that to me is a great example of greenwashing. The reason that company, in my opinion, is buying that plastic egg crate is because it is cheaper. It is a lot cheaper than paper. And they're going to tell you, oh, we're doing this because it's got a lower carbon footprint. I think I hear a lot of that in our industry. You got to remember, single-use plastics have a low carbon footprint. I mean, how do you lower a carbon footprint? The least amount of material possible. Without material, there is no carbon footprint. So, it's real easy for people in the plastics industry to lean into that carbon footprint argument just because a lot of their products are so thin compared to a paper alternative. But I think it's important to remember, and I don't have exact numbers here because they don't really exist. I had to back into some of these numbers, but based on my best estimates, packaging is about 2 or 3% of our total global carbon emissions. So we are not going to save the world from global warming by choosing plastic packaging over paper packaging or any packaging over another packaging based on its carbon footprint. We're going to have the biggest impact on climate change by shifting away from burning fossil fuels to renewable energy, to the electrification of transportation. And so, certainly, if the packaging industry is run on renewable energy, like if we have paper mills run on renewable energy, that's going to lower the carbon footprint of those paper products. And I'm all for that. But what I'm not for is saying this product right here has a slightly lower carbon footprint. It's highly pollution. The possibility for pollution is very high with this product than this other product, but it has a lower carbon footprint. To me, that is a very insincere argument. For me in packaging, given those facts, I think it's important that the primary thing we need to look at is this made from a renewable resource? And if it does end up in the environment, especially if it's consumer destined packaging, if it's going to end up at my house or your house, if it by chance ends up in the environment, will it biodegrade in a reasonable amount of time, which to me is like 3 to 4 months. Anything beyond that, I think you have to take question with. And if it answers those, and it isn't recyclable too. Paper-based products are highly recyclable. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the infrastructure to do it. So if it checks those boxes, forget about the carbon footprint. If you want to have an impact on climate change, buy solar panels for your home. Buy solar panels or wind for your businesses. Switch to electric vehicles. We traded out all of our forklifts, over 100 forklifts, from gas powered to electric forklifts. We made that purchase with Toyota here recently. That is how you can really offset carbon with renewable energy. We're going to offset, 5,000 tons over the next couple of years from renewable energy. Man, you can't make an impact with packaging, just looking at one piece of packaging to another. So anytime I see a carbon footprint argument associated with plastic packaging in particular, I'm not saying they're always insincere, but it's always worth asking a few more questions.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. And thank you for your insight. Cause I was like, this seems off to be like just intuitively, because I work with a lot of businesses and actually calculating their footprint, and you brought up an important point, because what people need to, so a couple things. One, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we have to reduce, and the key word is reduce, our global carbon footprint, right? We got to reduce global carbon footprint. Technically it's 49%, but let's just say 50% this decade, the 2020s, we got to reduce it. So what is the single most important thing a business can do this decade? Reduce your carbon footprint. To Wes's point, what are they doing? Renewable energy, electric forklifts. Okay, that is a concrete action that you can take. But the other point is that's you need to reduce your footprint. We need to be carbon neutral by 2050. But the interesting thing, because we kind of have been talking about supply chains, and for those of you who don't know much about carbon footprinting, there's 3 scopes. There's scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 1 and 2 are more or less company owned or controlled vehicles and buildings and purchase electricity. Scope 3 is your supply chain. Well, if every business calculated their carbon footprint, there would be no need to calculate a scope 3 emission, because everyone would be acting responsibly. And that's the thing that is and sort of and what I do with the fly fishing industry and mapping some of this out was to say, well, look, if every business here was just doing their scope 1, scope 2, we don't need to go through the process of scope 3, which is time consuming and is frankly, a little bit of a pain. Now I've made a way to make it a little bit easier, but all of that is to be said. Yeah. Well, all of that is said, but it's true. And so I guess and wrapping up that long-winded point is that, what Atlantic Packaging is doing, what all, a number of companies are doing, and I commend all of them, is to focus on reducing your footprint immediately. That's the number one thing you can do this decade. So anyway, again, I've gotten on my soapbox a couple of times this call, and I'll have to apologize in advance, but I get fired up and it's cool talking about this stuff. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Oh, I completely agree with your sentiments. I'm passionate about it myself. Atlantic, we have committed to be carbon neutral by 2030, scope 1 and 2. Like I said, the scope 2 is the easiest thing to tackle because it's your electricity burn, and renewable energy is affordable, it's available. And I encourage all industries to be looking, diligently at things like solar and wind. There's a 26% federal tax credit right now for solar panels. The ROI for us on our solar investment, which was very significant, we offset half of our scope 2 emissions with solar. the ROI was 5 to 7 years, which is probably a little bit outside of what traditional ROI. But, we're not living in traditional times, and I do believe, if you want to be an environmentally conscious organization, which everyone should be, you're going to have to factor in other things beyond ROI. Just doing the right thing being one of them. Scope 1 is transportation related. I have ordered tractor trailers from Elon Musk. I do not think I'll be his first delivery, but we've made that investment as well. And to your point, Scope 3 is a bear, the emissions of all of your suppliers. But I actually think, given the current conditions around the supply chain, the Scope 3 thing is relatively brilliant. I mean, it is forcing compliance across the supply chain. We get a lot of encouragement from our strategic customers, the consumer products companies, Anheuser-Busch being a big one. They're big leaders in this space. That they really encouraged us to get on board with this and inspired me, because we are their Scope 3 emissions, and a lot of the packaging companies that I buy from, I'm partnered with, they're my Scope 3 emissions. And so I put a lot of pressure on them to make these moves. And so of all the things from the Carbon Disclosure Project, which we're members of, the Scope 3, I think it's the most time consuming and the most cumbersome, but I also think it is the brilliance of carbon mapping across the supply chain. And I'm seeing evidence that it is working. So, we're awesome. Committed to being fully carbon neutral by 2050 in line with the climate accords, the Paris Climate Accords. The Scope 3 being the more difficult thing to tackle, but I would like to believe that we can get there sooner. Again, we're being really aggressive on 1 and 2 because that's something I can tackle immediately, and then hopefully get the Scope 3 done by 2040 is my actual goal.
That's amazing, and that's that's what it will take to solve the climate crisis. I mean, it is, hey, we're going to make an investment, and this is what it's the right thing to do, but there is a real legitimate business case for it. And we're willing to step up and put our money where our mouth is. And this is how we're going to do it. So I think that's a good segue, I guess I would say, into, we have covered a lot of ground on this call. I know a little bit, like I said, about packaging, but this was super interesting to dive into the supply chain components. But I also, because I'm just curious and I want to hear more about it, because I know you're involved with a project that centers around surfing and plastic pollution. And I'm going to stop there, and I want to hear more about this, because I'm personally intrigued and interested in it.
Yeah, well, no, it's really a passion project. I'm really excited about where it's headed. But basically, I have a guy that I work with who is a marketing and branding guy. He's out of Idaho, and he called me over Christmas and said, "Hey, back in my earlier career when I worked at Hurley, the surf brand Hurley, I worked closely with a guy named Peter King." And I'm like, "You talking about Peter King, the surfing journalist?" He's like, yeah, Peter. I was like, I sort of know who Peter King is. He's like, Peter was the first surfer that Bob Hurley ever signed. And today he lives in Hawaii on the North Shore, and he's a photographer and a documentary guy, and he does tour notes for the World Surfing League. So I was like, oh yeah, tour notes on WSL. I'm familiar with that. So he said, "Hey, listen, Peter wants to make a documentary on the history of surfing, where it's been, where it is today, and where it's going. But he wants to have an emphasis also on surf manufacturing, surfing apparel, sustainability, and he's trying to find a partner." And when he mentioned this to me, I said, "You know what? Wes Carter at Atlantic is the guy you need to talk to. I mean, he's really passionate about sustainability. They're doing some really cool things in the space, and Wes happens to be a surfer who grew up at Wrightsville Beach. The waves at Wrightsville Beach are nothing like the waves in Oahu, but hey, we do what we can." I'll never forget it. I had a Zoom call with Peter King on the 26th of December, the day after Christmas. And he and I we started rolling. I don't know how long that call was, several hours. And his passions and my passions just really linked up. So I looked at my wife and said, "Hey, I'm going to fly to Hawaii next week." She goes, "You're going to do what?" I was like, something about this feels really right. So she got excited as well. And we've been out there several times. And so Peter and I, came up with this plan to create a documentary series We're calling it a New Earth Project. And the real premise behind it is using the professional surfing community, which he's very engaged with, really as the advocates for the oceans, the ambassadors for the oceans. I can argue that there's no one who sees more of the oceans than the professional surfing community. I mean, these guys, we're in Australia last week, and they'll be in Africa next week, and they're on the west coast of the United States. They're in Central America. I mean, these guys are traveling the globe. And so they see this plastic pollution problem up close and personal globally, and so and these guys are real passionate about saving the oceans. They're real passionate about sustainability. The younger guys that are up and comers are really leaders in this space. But what they don't have is access to the supply chain. And that is what Atlantic brings to the table. So the collaboration is using the surfers as our ambassadors, and then utilizing Atlantic as the link to the supply chain to raise awareness, to feature programs and projects and circularity and packaging, to encompass all the things that you and I've talked about over the last hour, and create a documentary series that's really engaging for people. So it'll be entertaining. There's going to be a lot about the history of surfing. There's going to be a lot of great interviews with surfers from way back when, and a lot of modern day guys as well, but also a real emphasis on how can we as a global surfing community, professionals and amateurs like the rest of us, work together to begin to bring change. And a lot of that change comes from demanding change from the companies that make the products that we buy. I mean, that is a big piece of it. But it's also about raising awareness on a lot of the cleanup efforts. I mean, there are some really cool technologies out there. One of my favorites is a company called the Ocean Cleanup. And they have these very large ships that they put in rivers and oceans. I believe they have 19 of them now around the globe that basically sift plastic pollution out of rivers and oceans that then can be recycled. And so, and I believe documentary series like this can bring awareness to those technology and hopefully help those guys raise money to create more technology and build more ships. And so it's about cleaning up the ocean, but more than that, it's really about raising awareness. Like I said earlier in the podcast, we have to stop the tap. All the cleanup efforts in the universe are not going to be enough to overcome close to 30 million tons of plastic being dumped in the ocean every year. You got to turn off the tap. And that's the thing. If I could leave anybody, that's the biggest piece. And no single company, really no single entity across the supply chain can do this alone. I mean, it is the ultimate collaboration. And so for me, a New Earth Project, if I had to put one word on it, is collaboration. How do we work together as a global community of individuals, of professionals, of industry? How do we all come together to solve the most complex problem in modern history? And if we can do it, what a legacy. This can be our generation's moon landing. And I hope the New Earth Project can be, a jumping off point, to really begin this process. And so that's really what it is. And, we're hoping to begin to release some episodes later this year.
That's awesome. Well, Wes, I don't think that we could end on a higher note than promoting the work of the New Earth Project. And I mean, to be honest, I got a little fired up here at the end. So I appreciate that. I'm always looking for ways to stay inspired. So I do appreciate that. And thank you all for everything that you're doing to take responsibility for your business in terms of the products you produce, to reducing your carbon footprint, to I think film is an excellent medium to reach a large audience and educate and influence them. And so I'm stoked to see a New Earth Project as those start rolling out. Where can people find more info on Atlantic Packaging and a New Earth Project and any other things you got going on?
Yeah, so a New Earth Project, you can go to anewearthproject.com. And we also have an Instagram feed that we update really, really regularly. And that is A New Earth Project. You can find it on Instagram. I'm also Wes M. Carter on Instagram, and I post a lot of stuff related to sustainability on my personal feed. And then, LinkedIn is a great medium. It's one of my favorites. There's a lot of great information on there. A New Earth Project has a LinkedIn page, as well as Wes Carter with Atlantic Packaging. You can follow me. I friend everybody. If you request to follow me, I'll let you follow me, because I do believe that raising awareness is really important. So I want as many people on board talking about these things as possible. But Atlantic, we're AtlanticPKG.com. We got a great website. There's a lot of cool videos on there. We have a packaging solution center in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we do a lot of packaging testing and have a lot of technology there that even if you're not in packaging, there's some really cool stuff. There's a lot of videos on our website about that. So
awesome.
Would encourage everybody to come check us out. And even if you just want to watch some really cool surfing videos, Peter puts up really great videos on the New Earth Project Instagram page.
Yeah, I follow, and I'll have to concur. So thanks for listening to The Sustainable Angler, and special thanks to Wes Carter from Atlantic Packaging for everything that they're doing to be part of the solution. If you like what you're hearing on the show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. That helps us to expand our reach and our audience so that we can continue to educate and inspire anglers to take action and protect what we love. So, thanks again for listening.